Good evening. I am John Godfrey, Chair of the Wallenberg Executive Committee of the University of Michigan, and I am pleased to welcome you tonight. Because Aung San Suu Kyi is unable to travel from and return to Burma freely, this evening, this event is taking place in a wholly different format. Tonight, we will be showing a Wallenberg lecture that was recorded 3 weeks ago in Rangoon, Burma. We hope to follow the screening of the lecture with a live conversation by way of video and audio connection with Daw Suu at her home in Rangoon. Normally, we open questions to the audience. Unfortunately, since we are connecting with our speaker via the internet, technical limitations make this not possible. Rather, 4 students have been invited to speak with Daw Suu and to ask her questions that they have prepared. However, we also have distributed cards for those who may have a question for Daw Suu. Please keep your questions brief. We will try to use some of these questions in the time we have available. Now, I would like to remember Raoul Wallenberg and his legacy. When you begin, you're not sure. These words from the poet Seamus Heaney can get us started. At the age of 32, 10 years after receiving his degree in architecture from here at the University of Michigan, Raoul Wallenberg arrived in Budapest, in the heart of the bloodiest days of the bloodiest conflict of the 20th century. His was an assignment without hope: to save the last mortally threatened enclave of Jews remaining outside the death camps that defaced Europe. His path to this abyss had been oblique. His departure from what he called his crooked classical Stockholm through his student days here in Ann Arbor, across his time of travel in North America, South Africa, and Palestine, and to the final furthest edge where the despair of the Holocaust rang through the winter air and stripped away the artifice of the cosmopolitan Baroque city of Budapest. When you begin, you're not sure. What Wallenberg brought with him was not just the credentials of a Swedish diplomat in his leather valise. He brought with him an ability to perceive opportunities, and he was positioned by his experience of life and the world to take advantage of these opportunities. In his 6 short months, Wallenberg became the intermediary between death and the possibility of life. He negotiated endlessly with the predators in uniforms. He cajoled, intimidated, threatened. He innovated, distributing thousands of brightly colored and official-looking passes which asserted that the bearer, under Swedish authority and protection, was immune to arrest and deportation to death camps. He was creative, declaring buildings to be under Swedish diplomatic protection and their thousands of residents exempt from seizure. He took risks, pulling Jews from trains destined for Dachau and Mauthausen. He disrupted the Nazi death machine with every step he took. Who Raoul Wallenberg became through his life and across those desperate 6 months in Budapest is captured in words written, not coincidentally, by the woman we honor this evening. In her essay, Freedom from Fear, Aung San Suu Kyi reflects on the connection between fear and courage. Fearlessness may be a gift, but perhaps more precious is the courage acquired through endeavor, courage that comes from cultivating the habit of refusing to let fear dictate one's actions, courage that could be described as grace under pressure, grace which is renewed repeatedly in the face of harsh, unremitting pressure. Even under the most crushing state machinery, courage rises up again and again, for fear is not the natural state of civilized man. The medal that the University of Michigan presents commemorates that same fearless spirit of Raoul Wallenberg, whose every step strengthened his certainty of purpose and who saved the lives of tens of thousands. When you begin, you're not sure. This evening, the University of Michigan recognizes and celebrates an extraordinary woman who, like Raoul Wallenberg, teaches us that individuals of conscience make a difference in even the darkest moments of the human experience. To introduce our honored speaker, I am pleased to invite to the stage Lester Montz, Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, and Arthur F. Thurnau Professor and Professor of Music. Lester.
Thank you, John. Good evening to you all, and thank you for coming out to share with us this most momentous occasion. This evening, the University of Michigan will confer the 21st Wallenberg Medal. Over the past 2 decades, this medal has been awarded to extraordinary individuals. These are people who, like Raoul Wallenberg, have defended and rescued the exploited and persecuted. They exemplify the power of the human spirit to resist oppression when the majority is silent. They have given hope to the defenseless and fearful. They embody the daring assertion that one person can make a difference in a struggle for a better world. I want to thank the Wallenberg Executive Committee and John Godfrey for its dedication to ensuring that the memory of Raoul Wallenberg lives on and that the spirit of his convictions endures in this university that was his home. As the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, I take special pride in the engagement of Michigan students who seek to address the critical problems across the globe. For the past 5 years, supported by Wallenberg International Summer Travel Fellowships, undergraduate and graduate students have taken part in humanitarian community service projects or civic engagements across the world. This past summer, University of Michigan students assisted in a health and hygiene awareness campaign in Nepal, worked on human rights issues in Jordan, contributed expertise to arsenic mitigation in well water in Bangladesh, and developed an innovative mobile phone tool to assist patients recovering from tuberculosis in rural India. One student helped implement tools for tracking the growth and development of children in Chennai, India. These children visit a center that seeks to help the poorest of the poor escape the vicious cycle of poverty. The center was established 5 years ago by a student who received the Wallenberg Isabel Bergramian Summer Travel Award. This evening, I'm honored to present the Wallenberg Medal to an individual of extraordinary courage who has devoted her life on behalf of the people of Burma. Aung Suu Kyi is the daughter of Aung San, Burma's most hallowed hero of independence from colonial rule. She was only 2 years old when he was assassinated. Da Suu, as the Burmese know her, was educated in Burma, India, and the United Kingdom. While studying at Oxford, she met her husband, a scholar of Tibet. She studied philosophy, politics, and economics, and spent nearly 3 years in New York for graduate study. In 1988, she returned home to care for her dying mother. While there, a nationwide uprising began against the repressive military regime that had been in power for 25 years. It had made Burma one of the most isolated and impoverished countries in the world. Following a bloody repression and a new military coup, Da Suu, the daughter of the hero of Burma's first independence struggle, was appointed General Secretary of the newly formed National League of Democracy. With no previous engagement in politics, Da Suu became the leader of the Burmese struggle for human rights and freedom. She traveled the countryside, fearlessly calling for freedom and democracy and defending the dignity of the Burmese people. Facing popular pressure, the military government allowed elections in 1990, but they arrested Daw Suu and banned her from standing for election. Despite systematic repression, the National League of Democracy won with overwhelming support at the polls. But the military refused to recognize the election and embarked on years of violence and subjugation of the Burmese people. In 1991, in recognition of her fearless and nonviolent stand against tyranny in Burma's second struggle for national independence, Daw Suu was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. She continued to speak out, and in 1995, Daw Suu was placed under house arrest. In 1999, her husband died in London. Before his death, the Burmese regime refused to allow him to enter the country. Instead, the regime urged Daw Suu to travel to be with her dying husband and her children, but she knew she would not be allowed to re-enter the country. Many more years of restriction and house arrest followed. During intervals when she was allowed to travel around the country, Daw Suu rallied the Burmese people who had not given up their resistance. In 2003, she and her companions were attacked while traveling, and many were killed. She again was restricted to her house. Daw Suu has written, and I quote, "The only real prison is fear, and the only real freedom is freedom from fear," end of quote. For the past 7 years, she has been isolated, not able to communicate freely. Yet from this imposed internal exile, her unrelenting conviction that hope cannot be silenced and that hope must be paired with endeavor continues to ring out across the world. In November last year, after interventions from the UN, the United Kingdom, and the US, Daw Suu was released from house arrest. She had spent a total of nearly 15 years in detention. In recent months and weeks, hope has risen again for Burma's return to democracy. But Burma remains on the knife's edge, and as of now, the outcome remains uncertain. If freedom is restored, Burma's 58 million people will emerge into a changed world and a transformed Asia. So on behalf of the University of Michigan, I am proud to introduce Aung San Suu Kyi, who, although often silenced and exiled in her home, has led the people of Burma to this moment when they may reclaim their history. Daw Suu, as John pointed out, was not able to travel to be here in person, but she has kindly recorded the remarks we're about to watch.
Before I begin the lecture, I would like to thank the University of Michigan for choosing me as the recipient of the Wallenberg Medal for 2011. To be so honored is to be moved to contemplate on the greatness of soul that Wallenberg exemplified, and to be strengthened in the awareness that the world is in need of many Wallenbergs. I'm sorry I cannot be with you in person today, but our dedication to the cause of freedom binds us close together, and technological advancement has allowed me to see you and to speak to you as though we were in the same room. I'm grateful to all those who have made it possible. An old Burmese saying identifies the 3 happiest days in the life of a man. The first is the day he finishes his novitiate. All Burmese Buddhist boys are expected to be ordained as novices and to spend some time in a monastery at least once in their lifetime. The second one is his wedding day, and the third is the day on which he is released from jail. This saying raises many interesting questions about Burmese society, but for the purposes of this lecture, I will confine myself to the third day of happiness. I've often wondered whether it reflects a propensity in Burmese men to land themselves in trouble, or whether it indicates that Burmese authorities is inclined towards excessive use of their power to punish their subjects, or whether our ancestors, in their wisdom, were anticipating the events of today. Looking around at the colleagues and comrades closest to me, I cannot help but notice that there are few who have not spent some time in some form of detention as a result of their political activities. What is unquestionable is that our forebears believed that the restoration of freedom is one of the greatest joys man could experience. Freedom restored, how does it feel? I spent the major part of the last 20 years under house arrest. I have also spent short periods in a prison bungalow, in a military officer's quarter, converted into detention headquarters, and in a prison guest house. The day I was placed under house arrest for the first time in July 1984, I found the situation curious. In one reading of a piece of paper, the detention order, my home had turned into a prison. Or had it? Surely it was up to me to decide what the answer would be. When I was taken to an isolated bungalow within the precincts of insane jail in 2003, I again felt a sense of curiosity. The bars on the windows, the clanging of the heavy iron door, it was all so like, and yet not quite like, all the prisons of which I had read and heard. Was it up to me to decide whether or not stone walls and iron bars constituted a prison? The time spent in the military officer's rest house, in which I was quartered later, also provided much food for thought. It was built in the grounds of an expansive army cantonment. Care had obviously been taken to make it comfortable, and I was treated like a guest whose movements had been restricted for inexplicable reasons. I was a prisoner, certainly, but need I feel imprisoned? In 2009, I was accused of breaking the terms of my detention order and removed from my house to the guest house at Insane Jail. This place was meant for visiting prison officers from other parts of the country, and there were neither barred windows nor clanging iron doors, and I wondered whether it should or should not be seen as different from the bungalow I had occupied 6 years back. Should I feel any different? Intellectual curiosity about the changing circumstances in which I found myself gave me a sense of detachment that made me feel, in my mind, that I was always free. I was thus a disappointment to those who eagerly asked me after my release from each round of detention how it felt to be free. I don't feel any different would be my honest but far from exciting answer. I may not have felt different, but freedom was certainly different from captivity, and one becomes aware of this difference from the moment of release. When I was told in 1995 that after 6 years under house arrest, I could once again look upon myself as a free agent, I was not quite sure what my first act should be. The telephone line had been cut for all those years. I had no family waiting to greet me outside the gate. I had no idea how to contact any of my friends or colleagues. Finally, I asked the departing security officers if they could let those members of my party who lived nearest to my house know that I had been released. That was a curious sensation, to be once again in a position to decide with whom I would make contact and in what way. It was a re-entering into human society. When we ask for the release of political prisoners, we are asking that they be readmitted to their rightful place in human society. That freedom of association, together with other freedoms of which they had been deprived, be restored to them. What is it about freedom that makes it a burning issue for all times? Give me freedom or give me death, liberty, equality, fraternity. The ringing calls for freedom that have resonated across the ages and across racial and political and geographical divides stand evidence to man's yearning to be free. But why should this be so? Why is it that humans, and animals too, instinctively shy away from the threat of a shackled existence? It has been argued that it is impossible to attain a state of pure freedom, as the extent to which living creatures can exercise their will freely is unavoidably circumscribed by their own circumstances. I do not propose to enter into discussion of free will here. My aim is simply to examine what freedom means to ordinary people outside the realm of philosophical speculation, particularly to those who have been engaged in the movement for democracy and human rights in Burma. The desire for freedom is closely related to resentment against perceived injustices. The uprising against the dictatorship of the military-backed Burma Socialist Program Party, BSPP, in 1988 was rooted in anger and dissatisfaction initially stirred up by the demonetization of banknotes in 1987. The economic stagnation into which the country had fallen under the BSPP administration had made it very hard for anybody to earn a decent income honestly. And when the public saw the savings they had managed to scrape together vanishing overnight, their outrage was dry tinder waiting to become a raging conflagration. The necessary spark was provided in March 1988 when the crude handling by the authorities of a fracas that had taken place between students of the Rangoon Institute of Technology and local youths led to clashes between the police and students, 2 of whom were shot dead. This was the beginning of massive demonstrations that swept across the country as people from all walks of life poured out onto the streets to give vent to a sense of injury that had been rankling in their breasts throughout the years of helpless submission to an authoritarian power. The uprising of 1988 started out as a movement against repression and injustice. It was a demand for the removal of shackles. It was a call for redemption, a cry for freedom as escape from the restraints that cramped the quality of life. To be forced to submit unremittingly to the will of others is to be denied the right to exercise control over one's own life, to be deprived of the basic independence essential for the upholding of human dignity. Hundreds of thousands marched to the streets of all the major cities and towns, and even some of the bigger villages of Burma, roaring out, "Our cause." At the beginning, that cause was not identified. There was just a conviction that it was something quite different from what authoritarianism had to offer. It was, ironically, 3 simple words used by the aging dictator Ne Win, chairman of the BSPP, in his last speech to the National Assembly that provided the first inkling of what would turn out to be the cause around which the Burmese public would rally. As Ne Win announced his resignation from the party, he declared that the people should choose between a one-party system or a multi-party system. There were many in Burma in 1988 who remembered that more than 20 years ago, there had been a multi-party system in the country, a multi-party democracy. They also remembered that in those far-off days, the continued survival in office of a government had depended on the votes of the people, and consequently, the administration had respected the public and made efforts to fulfill their demands. The young, whose participation was central to the movement, had neither experience nor memory of democratic governance, but they were quick to accept that our cause was democracy, and, almost as a natural extension, human rights as well. However, these were to be the means towards a desired end. The goal of the movement for democracy in Burma was to lay the foundations for institutions that would make our nation a haven where people could feel comfortable in their own skins. Those who wish to denigrate the struggle for democracy in Burma have contended that our people barely understand anything about democracy, that we are neither fit for democratic institutions nor ready for the exercise of democratic rights, that the military rule in different guises under which we have had to live since 1962 was simply what we had deserved. We need to examine such accusations in the light of what our people expected to achieve through the democratic revolution. In October 1988, very soon after the founding of the National League for Democracy, I went around the country to try to discover what had moved our people to reject the only system of government they had ever known, and what we would need to do to realize the legitimate aspirations that the great majority of us shared. During a meeting with new party members from Zejo, a famous market in Mandalay, a young woman stood up and admitted that while she wholeheartedly supported the movement for democracy, she did not really know much about politics. I then asked her why she wanted democracy, and she explained that she had a small shop and she simply wished to go about her business freely and honestly, without fear of undue interference from the authorities, and she was convinced that, given these basic freedoms, she would be able to do very well indeed for herself. It seemed to me that she had understood the most important thing about democracy, that it was not an end in itself, but the means towards achieving a particular kind of society, one that would incorporate guarantees of basic freedoms and fair play for its members. As I went across the country discussing democracy and human rights, I would come across, again and again, this coupling of freedom with fair play, with justice. Everybody wished for better health and education facilities, a sound economy, a more hopeful future for their children. However, and this I found most encouraging, the majority believed they could build better lives for themselves, provided unreasonable restraints, particularly those imposed by corrupt, unaccountable officialdom, were removed. The young shopkeeper from Mandalay and others like her were expressing, in their own modest, non-academic way, views very similar to those of Professor Amartya Sen's ideas on development and freedom. Development requires the removal of major sources of unfreedom, poverty as well as tyranny, poor economic opportunities as well as systematic social deprivation, neglect of public facilities as well as intolerance or overactivity of repressive states. Again, Professor Sen, greater freedom enhances the ability of people to help themselves and also to influence the world, and these matters are central to the process of development. The people of Burma had made democracy their cause because they wanted the freedom to be able to help themselves. To engage in politics in post-1988 Burma was to start Chapter 2 of the history of democracy in our country. The introduction was the movement for independence that had politicized the masses and woken them to the centricity of their role in the making of the nation. Chapter 1 constituted the first years of independence, when a parliamentary democracy had managed to survive and even to put out gallant shoots of social and economic progress, in spite of old wounds left by war and colonialism, and new ones that had opened up with the eruption of the so-called multicolored insurgencies. multicolored because there were the red and white mutually hostile communist forces, the Karen National Defense Organization, and the White Comrades, an organization headed by veterans of the Patriotic Burmese forces that had joined the Allies towards the end of the war to defeat Japanese troops in the country. The struggling young democracy of post-independence was brought to a close by the military coup of 1962. Chapter 2 of the quest for democracy had to be started almost from scratch. From democracy to human rights is a natural transition. In 1988, very, very few people in Burma had heard of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is evidence of the genius of the document that once its contents were made known to those who had hitherto been totally unaware of its existence, understanding and acceptance followed quickly. The very first paragraph of the preamble was a clear expression of their inarticulate longings, and it was a moving experience to realize suddenly what it was they had been lacking all their lives, and to be assured that this lack was recognized with understanding and sympathy by the great and powerful of the earth. Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. That is how the preamble begins. Freedom, justice, and peace. Were these not what they had been demanding all along? The preamble went on to declare that the highest aspiration of the common people was the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear and want. They were the common people. They were human beings. And yes, what they wanted most was to enjoy those freedoms that would enable them to live as dignified, worthy human beings. The different freedoms are connected and mutually strengthening. I have emphasized freedom from fear in our struggle because I see it as the master key that will open the door to other freedoms. Fear renders us dumb and passive. Fear paralyzes. If we are too frightened to speak out, we can do nothing to promote freedom of speech. If we are too frightened to challenge injustices, we will not be able to defend our right to freedom of belief. Neither will we dare to ask for the rectification of the social and economic ills that make our lives a misery. Fear, anywhere, in any language, belittles, negates, and degrades. The Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore described the heaven of freedom as a place where the mind is without fear. Freeing ourselves from fear has been the unseen, crucial part of our struggle for democracy in Burma. It takes courage and commitment to achieve freedom and to uphold it. Where there are no laws and institutions to protect basic human rights, individuals have to fall back on their own will to practice and promote the freedoms in which they believe. The support of those who share their commitment helps them greatly in this endeavor. More than 10 years ago, I asked the students of an American university to use their liberty to promote ours. This message was picked up by peoples from across the world. We have been helped in our struggle. We have not been alone. Contact with free peoples enhances the sense of freedom. During the years under house arrest, such contact through the radio or through books helped to keep my mind free. To this day, whenever I receive a new book, I feel a stir of excitement in anticipation of the wider world into which I would be admitted through its pages. I can never be grateful enough to those who have helped me to feel I was part of the free world even during those times when that world seemed as far away as the most distant stars. Even as the light of stars managed to reach us after long years, so the sympathy and solidarity of peoples, very often complete strangers, who care for our freedom as though it were their own, break through human and geographical barriers to give us solace and strength. An unshackled mind is the first step towards genuine freedom that is as liberating for others as for our own selves. If we are sensitive to our own need for freedom, but indifferent or even contemptuous of the same need in others, we devalue the concept of freedom. Liberty that is used to inflict pain and justice on others is an aberration. It is no longer liberty, it degenerates into license. The ability to value the freedom of others as we value our own freedom is based on breadth of vision, a capacity for empathy, and a sense of responsibility. If freedom is to survive and flourish, we who believe in it must prove that it is a force that can be directed along positive channels by our dedication to a healthy balance between rights and responsibilities, by our ability to respect the hopes and aspirations of others as we would wish others to respect our own hopes and aspirations. I refer to Raoul Wallenberg as a great soul at the beginning of the lecture. It is difficult enough for the average man to value others as he values himself, but to value others more than one's own self, that is a rare phenomenon indeed. We in the movement for democracy in Burma have been admired and applauded for our efforts to gain freedom and justice for our people. But in the face of a Wallenberg, we feel humbled. We are struggling for our own people, our own country. What Wallenberg did was to sacrifice himself for peoples of a different country, a different race, a different religion. For him, the differences were much less significant than the ties of common humanity. He teaches us that the highest form of freedom is freedom from the narrowness of mind that ties us to prejudices and to hate, and makes us indifferent to the sufferings of those we perceive as different from ourselves. When I was released from house arrest last year, I explained that I did not feel any different because my mind had always been free. Now, almost a year on, let me tell you what it means to be free. It means that I can sit down and record this lecture. It means I can communicate with you. It means I can go out of my house at any time I please. It means I can talk to friends, confer with colleagues. It means I can work to take our country further along the road to democracy. Freedom means activity. Freedom means movement. Freedom means life. To deny freedom means to deny life. That is why lovers of life cry out, "Give me freedom or give me death." And that is why I would like to conclude with this tribute to Raoul Wallenberg. Greater value has no man than this, that he lays down his life for the freedom of his fellow human beings.
Tonight we're using Skype to speak with Da Suu at her home in Rangoon, where it is about 7 in the morning. Actually, it's a little bit earlier than that. This is a difficult undertaking because of Burma's limited network bandwidth capacity. We hope to have video and an audio connection, and to provide her with both an audio and video connection so she can see all of you here in Rackham Auditorium. If we are unable to secure a video connection, we will try to maintain an audio connection alone. And if communication with Skype is unsuccessful or is interrupted, we will try to establish contact with her via telephone. This process may require several minutes and will require some patience from you. I would like now to introduce our panel of students who have very generously volunteered to be here with us this evening. I'd like to introduce Dominic Nardi. Dominic, over here on the right. Who's a doctoral student in political science and who works on the judicial politics of Southeast Asia. Sarah Feenstra is a senior in the LS&A Honors Program with a concentration in neuroscience and a minor in international studies. Andrea Alebegovic is a junior in the LS&A Honors Program with a concentration in international studies. And Tyler Jones is a junior in the LS&A Honors Program with an individualized interdisciplinary concentration in asymmetric conflict. I'd like Lester now to come to the platform.
Good morning, Dasu. Thank you for joining us at such an early hour. And thank you for your inspiring courage. My name is Lester Mons. I am the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs here at the University of Michigan, and it is my honor to welcome you to the university. I am standing in Rackham Auditorium, where students, faculty, and staff are gathered, as well as members of the Ann Arbor community, for the presentation of the 21st Wallenberg Medal. As you cannot leave Burma before freedom for Burmese people is secured, we are honored to present the Wallenberg Medal for the first time in absentia. We are privileged to have you with us via the internet, and we're arranging to deliver this medal to you. Through your courage and sustained endeavor on behalf of human rights, freedom, and democracy for Burmese people, and through your conviction in the power of the human spirit to confront, resist, and overcome tyranny, you are truly a champion of Raoul Wallenberg. And I want to show you your medal.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Dasu. My name is John Godfrey, and I am pleased to introduce you to the University of Michigan students with whom you will be speaking. May I present Andrea Alebegovic, Dominic Nardi, Tyler Jones, and Sarah Feenstra. And I would like to start and to invite Sarah to come up and to ask the first question.
Dasu, it's an honor to be with you today. You've exemplified remarkable courage and perseverance throughout your life. Who has been an inspiration to you or served as a role model for you?
I've had many role models. To begin with, of course, it was my father, and then my mother. People often forget that I was brought up almost at the time. And although my father was an inspiration to me, it was my mother who taught me how to live, who taught me how important it was to have a highly developed sense of duty, and who taught me what real courage was, because she was one of the bravest people I've ever come across.
Hello, Dasu. My name is Andrea Alibegovic, and I would like to preface my question by saying that I'm truly honored and privileged to have the chance to ask you about your speech and your remarkable dedication to the people of Burma and the promotion of human rights. My question is, how do you feel that your time under house arrest and other forms of captivity have affected the movement you helped to build, if at all?
I'm not quite sure how it's affected all the people who are in the movement, but I think the fact that I was placed under house arrest for so many years did focus attention on our movement for democracy. And because it did that, I think I have to say I feel that the years of detention were worthwhile. And in any case, I think I learned a lot from those years of detention. I saw many aspects of life which I had not seen before. So I think in the end, it depends on how you use your time, what you make of it. A lot depends on what you put into life, not what life puts out for you.
Thank you.
Hello, Dosu. My name is Dominic Nardi. Nigombala Kimia. Nigomare. My wife is actually Burmese, so if I can take a moment and just extend our personal thank you. She was Prospect Burma Fellow, and I know your support has meant a lot to her over the years, so thank you. I'm by background a lawyer, so if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a question about the new Constitution. We all know that there's been a lot of criticism of the Constitution, but oftentimes when we see countries transition to democracy, sometimes they replace their constitution and sometimes they simply amend it. So I was wondering, for Burma's constitution, can you envision a transition to democracy under this constitution, or do you think it will have to be replaced?
I think we'll first start thinking about it in terms of amendment, because there are some parts of the Constitution which we do not think are at all compatible with the democratic values. But there are other parts which are not entirely inimical to democratic values. So I think we should start trying to amend the worst parts of the Constitution. And if it is the wish of the people, we may have to change the whole Constitution. That's, after all, what democracy is about, that our country should be run in accordance with the will of the people. And since a Constitution is fundamental to how a nation is run, in the end, it is the people who must decide whether they want to go in for total replacement or for amendments.
Thank you.
Dasu, good morning. My name is Tyler Jones. I would like to preface my question by thanking you for your inspirational remarks this evening. From the situation in Burma today to the ongoing crisis in the Middle East, I believe that today, perhaps more so than any other time in history, your words are truly salient. My question for you is regarding some comments you made in 2007 regarding nonviolence and protests. When speaking about the Burmese anti-government protests, you highlighted the importance of nonviolence in the quest for democracy, even though this may ultimately prolong the quest for freedom. Today, similar protests have taken root in the Middle East. Recently, an Egyptian activist is quoted as saying, "The Egyptian revolution was peaceful. Whereas most revolutions end with thousands getting their heads cut off, we spared the heads, and today they are working against our revolution." In your view, how can those in the Middle East today continue along the path of nonviolence and still hope for a successful regime change?
I believe in nonviolence. Not everybody believes in nonviolence. But I think that in the long run, nonviolence pays. As I said, as you mentioned, I have said that it's a longer road, it's more difficult. But there are fewer wounds to be healed. Now, those heads that were not cut off, perhaps now they're thinking against the revolution. But that means there has been less bloodshed, fewer wounds, and that in the long run, Egypt will be able to come to an understanding. The people of Egypt will be able to understand each other, and there'll be less friction. I think what is so important for all peoples and all countries is to be able to work out a situation which is acceptable to all. That is to say, we've got to work towards harmony, towards peace and harmony. And the fewer wounds there have been, the easier it will be to work towards peace and harmony. And so what if some heads are thinking against you? Heads are there to think. I prefer heads that think rather than heads that nod all the time or shake all the time. Let's all think, and let's all think of a way of resolving our differences. I prefer people with heads than without.
Hello again. How can citizens of countries outside Burma, such as the United States, be better world citizens in regards to promoting democracy and human rights in Burma?
I've always emphasized awareness. I think the people of the United States, especially the young people, need to be aware of what is going on in the rest of the world. You are very fortunate. Of course, you may not think so in times like financial crises, but compared to many people in other parts of the world, the citizens of the US are very fortunate indeed. And I would not like you to forget others in your good fortune, not to forget the misfortune of others. And I would like you to understand that you are a very fortunate country and not always be looking at the dark side of things. For example, you can afford to take democratic rights for granted. When you organize an occasion like this, you think it's perfectly easy. You want to have this kind of occasion, you organize it. You want to award a gold medal to somebody from the other side of the world, you can't do it. It's not easy for people like us and many others like us who live in countries where there's no genuine freedom, when there are no democratic institutions to safeguard our rights. I would like you to remember that you are fortunate. I wouldn't like the United States always to be doing itself down, because we do appreciate you as a friend and as a defender of democracy. So to begin with, you help us all by defending your own democratic values, by doing whatever you can to make your citizens truly democratic and open-minded. Because these two go together. You cannot really practice democratic values if you're narrow-minded, because democracy depends on the participation of as many people as possible. So if you first defend your democratic values and your broad-mindedness, you will help the rest of the world. And then, of course, we want some practical help from you as well. We would always like to be behind our movements for democracy and to help us to educate our young people. In the long run, the greatest help we need is that in the realm of education.
Thank you.
This next question is inspired by my thoughts about how the United States has not had a female head of state as of yet. So I would like to ask you if you feel that being a woman has affected your success as the leader of the nonviolent democratic movement in Burma.
Well, perhaps they're waiting for you. You never know when the next when the next head of state of the United States is going to be a woman. But I think that women are just as capable as men when it comes to heading any kind of organization or movement or a nation. You mustn't forget that the first woman head of government was a nation. If you remember, it was Mrs. Bandaranaike from Sri Lanka, or Ceylon as it was then. And we are very confident that our women can do just as well, if not better, than the men. And I'm sure the same thing applies to the United States. And I would like to see a woman at the head of the greatest democracy in the world. So hurry up.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, Dosu. I wanted to ask you about what Burma can do today to prepare for a better democracy tomorrow, partly because in Southeast Asia, we've seen several countries that have transitioned to democracy, yet still face huge challenges. the political conflict in Thailand, election violence, and poverty in the Philippines. So what should Burma be doing now to make sure that when democracy does come, it's democracy not just a name, but also in practice? Thank you.
It all comes down to education, doesn't it? We in the National League for Democracy spend a lot of our time trying to educate. I hesitate a little to use this word, because it sounds a bit patronizing, but I don't mean it in that way at all. What I mean is opening up the minds of our people and to supply them with as much information and knowledge as possible so that they can think for themselves. As I said earlier, one of the most important things about democracy is broad-mindedness. We want people to be able to understand other people's points of view. I think for a working democracy, you do need to be broad-minded. You need to be able to empathize with others. So we try to teach our young people as much as we can about the responsibilities of democracy. Whenever I talk about democratic rights, I never forget to mention the fact that there are responsibilities as well, that rights and responsibilities go together. For a democracy to succeed, I think that is extremely important. From the very beginning, we must make our people understand that democracy is not just about rights, rights, rights. It's about responsibilities as well. You want a government of the people, and the people must take responsibility for that government. So I think this is what we need, and this is what we've been trying to achieve in Burma. And sometimes I think that because our movement has been so long and so difficult, perhaps because of that very fact, our people will be better qualified to defend and preserve democracy when we get there. Yeah, buddy.
My second question is regarding the current situation in Libya. Last week, Muammar Gaddafi was killed, effectively ending his oppressive rule in Libya. However, with so much attention paid to the civil war and not much focus given to the post-war nation building, Libya is now left without a legitimate governing body and the cleanup from a bloody civil war. How, in your view, is it possible for countries like Libya, who have never really known any form of democracy, to begin to develop a country that speaks for the people?
I'm glad you mentioned these problems in Libya, because this is exactly what I meant when I said that if you get to democracy or freedom through violent means, then you leave wounds that will be very, very difficult to heal. I think they have to make a start. Nobody gets anywhere without making a start. And I think the whole world needs to help Libya to get over the trauma of the last few months and learn to get over the bitterness, to get rid of the bitterness. I think that the most frightening thing for any country is when the people are set against each other and when there are deeply felt feelings of hatred and resentment. I do not think that the feelings of hatred and resentment are going to go away from Libya just because they have moved Gaddafi. These are going to go on. People have shot at each other, people have killed each other, people have tortured each other. These are not going to be forgotten in a hurry. But we need some people who will start this in Libya. I would like to see a genuine, non-violent movement emerging out of the people of Libya, who will help to heal the wounds of the country and to put it on the right path. It's not going to be easy, and I'm not expecting Libya to be transformed overnight into a peaceful country where everybody understands everybody else. But somebody, somewhere must begin. And let's hope for a Libyan Martin Luther King, a Libyan Gandhi, a Libyan Nelson Mandela. We must hope for these things.
I have a question from an audience member for you, Dao Suu. How can academia and universities in Burma help in the quest toward democracy?
I have to say that I think, first of all, universities in Burma should start educating our young people. because the system here is very, very bad. And until our young people are well enough educated to see what is happening in the rest of the world, to be able to examine our own history and to understand why we have come to where we have come to, then I do not think we will be able to make progress. So our universities need to be real educational institutions, not just places that churn out half-educated young people. So this is what we want. First of all, we want to raise the standard of education in our universities, and we would like your help in this. Until our young people have acquired the basics of an educated society, we will not be able to go forward. Once our young people are properly educated, they will be able to see for themselves what our country really needs and what we need to do to preserve the values that will help our country to go forward as a democracy. So you asked earlier, what can the United States do to help? Well, the United States and the rest of the world can help us to educate our young people as well as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have another question from an audience member here. The question is, what skills did you draw from your college education that you have used and valued the most in your life's work?
When I was under house arrest, very often I would think of my friends, the ones who were at university with me. And those memories were not just some of the happiest memories I had, but the most strengthening, because I remember that we all came from different countries. Of course, I had English friends because I was studying in England, but I had Indian friends, I had Pakistani friends, I had Thai friends, I had Kenyan friends, Ghanaian friends, friends from all over the world. And I think that was the most important part of my university education, that I learned to know people from all parts of the world and to understand that we all shared the same hopes and aspirations and fears, that we were all human beings. And it's very, very nice to be human beings young together, because don't forget that, don't waste your youth. Youth is a lovely time. And it was a time when we really cemented our feelings of warmth and sympathy for each other. And these friends are still my friends. And that's what I got most out of my university education, that you can reach out to people from different parts of the world, from different cultures, who belong to different religions, and you can still build up such a solid and such a deep understanding that it carries through for the rest of your life, and you can think of them when you're in times of trouble and feel, well, this is not a bad world after all.
Thank you.
Hello, Dasu. I have a question from an audience member. Can you comment a bit about the situation, the political situation in Thailand right now, and in particular, do you see any similarities with the political struggle going on there and the struggle in Burma for democracy? Thank you.
I'm sorry, going on where?
The political situation in Thailand.
Thailand. Well, Burma and Thailand are neighbors, very close geographically, but we are quite different in many other ways. We try to learn from what's going on in other parts of the world, and we try to learn from their successes as well as their mistakes. Now, I'd rather not talk about the mistakes of other countries, but thinking of the successes, of course, Thailand is well ahead of us economically and even politically, because Thailand has had a number of democratic elections, not perhaps as smoothly as one would wish for, but certainly they have passed through a number of democratic elections and built up a number of democratic institutions. For example, the Thai media is certainly a lot freer than we are, and this is something that we admire. But we do not look upon Thailand as the one country that we should see as an example. There are many other countries that we study, that we observe, and as I said earlier, we try to find out how they've succeeded, where they've succeeded, and where their mistakes have been, and how we should avoid them. One of the advantages of being right at the very back is that we can profit from the mistakes of others. Yep.
I have a question from the audience which asks, what is the best strategy to keep, or rather to stop, the ongoing civil wars in Burma, and what would it take to have a broad-based anti-war campaign?
This is a very difficult question. We've been trying to find the answer to this question for the last 60-odd years, ever since we achieved independence. We've never been able to achieve a situation of absolute peace in Burma. There have always been some form of insurgencies or other going on in this country. We need to become a true union. We think that the most important thing in the end is the spirit. We always talk about building up a spirit of a true union. We've got to understand each other. We've got to respect each other. We've got to learn to know each other better. I think that our ethnic nationalities have genuine reasons for their grievances. We need to address those issues. I do not have all the answers. If only I had all the answers, we'd be there by now. But we're trying to find the answers, I think, and we first have to start by talking to one another. This is what we believe in. We believe that human beings we can talk to one another. Animals can't talk to one another, although I believe there are some scientists who say that they can talk, well, not talk, but communicate with one another to a far greater degree than we think they can. But still, no one can deny that human beings can talk. And we've got to use this facility to come to an understanding with one another. I believe in talking. This is what we're doing now, aren't we? We're talking to one another, trying to learn more from one another. And I believe that because the Burmese are the majority in this country, they have a duty to be more broad-minded, to be more tolerant, and to work harder towards peace and understanding.
You mentioned in your talk that freedom from fear has been the unseen, crucial part of the struggle for democracy in Burma. How have you been able to realize this freedom in your life?
Well, I've never thought of myself as a very brave person, but I've had to work to free myself from fear. This, of course, started when I was a very little girl and I was terribly scared of the dark. And I decided one day that this was something I had to get over because it was such a burden. I think you start thinking seriously about freeing yourself from fear when you understand how great a burden that is. If you live with fear, if you let fear influence your life, that is genuine lack of freedom, even if you're not in prison, even if you're not under house arrest. If you're frightened all the time, then I think you must be the most unfree person imaginable. And the reason why I started trying to free myself from fear as a little girl was because I couldn't bear the burden of going into a dark room and being frightened. And so I just sat down and thought to myself one day, what is it that I'm frightened of? I've got to face it, and I've got to get over it. And I managed to get over it. Actually, it only took me 2 weeks to get over my fear of the dark, simply by walking round and round in dark rooms for 2 weeks in succession. And I realized that nothing was going to happen to me in the dark.
Thank you.
Dasu, I have another question from the audience. What do you think, and so it is about China, what do you think of your influence between your country, in the relationship between your country and China, and what do you think of the political transition to democracy in China?
First of all, I think I must make the point, which I make very, very often, that Burma and China are neighbors. And we will always be neighbors as long as this world lasts. And because of that, I would like to maintain good, friendly relations with China and with all our other neighbors. I do not think this is impossible because we have always maintained good relations with China, even at a time when Burma had a democratic government after independence, and China was a very strong communist society. We still managed to maintain good relations. So we've got to work towards that. And with regard to China's transition to democracy, I myself believe in democracy, and I believe that basically human beings want to be free and they also want to be secure. And democracy is a system that tries to give both in good balance, security and freedom. And because of that, I believe that human societies will work towards democracy and that there will be a transition to democracy, not just in China, but in other countries all over the world. Not all at the same time, not all in the same way, and of course, not exactly the same sort of democracies, but basically the kind of system that assures both freedom and security for its citizens.
Thank you.
I think I have to get a word of Burmese before you begin. Nigahe lalu amyudmi umilai pa.
Nigamare.
Okay.
Sorry, Tapioba?
Well, I was actually asking how your wife was because you said she was Burmese.
She unfortunately can't make it tonight, but you know, she's watching us live, so I know this means a lot to her, so thank you. Actually, my next question is from her. She wanted me to ask about trust in Burmese society, because both in Burma... About trust.
Oh, yes.
You know, both within Burma and even amongst Burmese living in America now, there very often different groups of Burmese people don't trust each other. The people don't trust the government doesn't trust the people. In Washington, D.C., where I lived for several years, Burmese activists don't trust academics who study Burma. And in Burma, many of the ethnic minority groups don't trust the government. So I guess in short, what can be done to rebuild trust both within Burma and amongst Burmese populations around the world? Thank you.
I've always thought that it had something to do with lack of self-confidence because Burma as a society has not exactly promoted self-confidence in our people. And if you lack self-confidence, it's very difficult to trust others. You're suspicious, you're jealous. Have you come across a famous Burmese envy syndrome? And that is based on lack of self-confidence. So we need to build up self-confidence in our people. We need them to understand that you don't have to take away from others in order to have more yourself. And if you can feel that by giving more to others, you make yourself a more complete person, then I think this lack of trust will lessen. Well, it's very appropriate that you should ask this question at this lecture, because Raoul Wallenberg was a man who was full of self-confidence. And the work that he did required trust. He had to trust others while he was carrying out his very, very dangerous mission. Or not, it was not even just one mission. Let us put it as missions, because it was so multifaceted. And a man like him, he was able to do this. He was able to trust others because he trusted himself. He had full confidence in himself. So if you want to help our people to trust one another, you've got to help us to build up our self-confidence. This has a lot to do with the way in which society is run.
Thank you.
In your remarks, you spoke of the necessity to remove oppression and intolerance from society in order for development to be possible. However, as we see today in Egypt, though the Mubarak regime is no longer in power, conflict between the old guard and reformers continues to stall democratization. My question is, do you think it really is possible for true democracy to develop in countries like Egypt or Burma, where roots of oppression and corruption seem so indelibly ingrained in the political psyche? Thank you.
Well, wasn't there oppression in the United States? Well, after all, you can't pretend that there was never such a thing as oppression in the United States. And you worked your way out of it. I think people have to work their way out of situations like that. I mean, what's the point of being human if you're prepared to stay in a pit forever? We've got to climb out. And I believe that human beings do have the ability to climb out of these pits of hatred and resentment and anger and intolerance. We have to learn to do that. And I think one of the ways in which we learn is through the example of others who can prove that tolerance is better than intolerance, that freedom is better than oppression. This is why free countries and free peoples have a lot of responsibility. As I said earlier, rights and responsibilities go together. You're enjoying all the rights of democracy. You have to bear its responsibility as well. You have to make people understand, not by being patronizing, not by being arrogant, but with due humility, that you can get rid of oppression, you can get rid of anger and resentment and intolerance, and build better lives for yourself and for others around you.
Thank you.
What steps of progress toward democracy in Burma do you anticipate in the next few years, and how do you see yourself being involved in that?
First of all, of course, we've got to gain the release of all political prisoners. You cannot call yourself a democracy unless there are no political prisoners. Unless a country is free from prisoners of conscience, it's not a really free country. So this is one of the things we have to work towards. But there's another more important, in the long run, more important work for all of us, and that is peace. We talked about this earlier, peace between all the ethnic nationalities. We've got to achieve that. There can be no democracy without genuine peace, and no genuine peace without democracy. These two go together. And for me, this is the most important thing that we've got to work towards in the next 1-2 years, to establish a genuine union in Burma. We want all our ethnic nationalities to be at peace with one another and to build our nation together. Unless we are all together in this, we will not succeed.
Thank you.
What advice would you give to young people who are unhappy with and would like to change the current social and political systems in place in your country or in any country?
First, I think you've got to ask yourself what it is you're unhappy about. It's easy to be unhappy, but it's more difficult to really find out what it is you're unhappy about. And once you know what it is you're unhappy about, then you've got to start trying to change it, provided it's not an entirely selfish reason, such as not getting the biggest ice cream cone you can get and so on, if you're a child. But you've got to understand why you're unhappy. And by resolving your own unhappiness, are you going to be helping others as well? I think that's important. I don't think you should see your unhappiness apart from other people's lives. We're all connected to one another. And young people are so lucky because they've got so much time ahead of them. I said earlier that when I was under house arrest, I used to think of my days as a student, and it would make me happy because we were so full of, we were so full of confidence. There was life opening up ahead of us. And I would like you to see it like that. There is the whole of your life ahead of you in which you can do so much to make our world a better place to live in. So if you're unhappy, find out what it is that is making you unhappy and try to do something about it. Don't just sit there. You won't get anywhere by just sitting there.
Thank you very much.
Well, unfortunately, this is the final question, but I did, very often when you were under house arrest, you were known as the world's most famous political prisoner, and celebrity is sometimes a great thing, but celebrity can also sometimes be a burden, and I wanted to ask you generally how you deal with your celebrity, whether you see it as a burden, an asset, or something else, and then more specifically, I know that there's a Hollywood movie about you coming out later this year, so could you comment about that? Thank you.
Well, first of all, I've never thought of myself as a celebrity. That's rather an embarrassing sort of word, isn't it? I worry a little about the politics of celebrity. That I have to say. I think there could be too much of that, and I think that could make you lose track of what is really important. So celebrity is a dangerous thing, and it's best not to think about it too much. Now, with regard to with regard to yourself, I mean, and when you consider celebrities, then I think you should try to learn as much as you can from them, the dangers of that celebrity involves. Of course, there are advantages, I don't deny that, because people knew me well, I was protected. This is why I say that the real heroes of our movement are the totally unknown people, the ones who have worked very hard and who go to prison, whose names are never mentioned in any speech by any statesman, who never received any prizes and who will probably never receive any prizes in the future, but who are still satisfied with what they have done because they have done something in which they believe. These are the real heroes of our movement. And when I think about them, this really makes me feel very, very humble indeed, that a celebrity is really far less of a hero than somebody who is a totally unknown soldier of our cause. And with regard to that film, I find it a little embarrassing. I have to confess that I don't like the ideas of films made about me. I don't know what's in it. Let me say that I've met Luc Besson and his wife, and I like them very much as people. But I'm not terribly keen on watching the film. Perhaps I never will. And I would just like to say this is a particular vision of who I am and what I went through. It's not necessarily an accurate reflection of what I am and what I had to go through.
Thank you again. Thank you.
Suu, thank you very much. On behalf of the University of Michigan's Wallenberg Committee and the Rackham Graduate School, we would like to thank you for joining us, and our best wishes go to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
I would also like to thank you, before you break up, I'd like to thank the extraordinarily dedicated staff who set up this Around the World conversation. This includes the professionals who enabled us to have this lecture this evening. and the amazing technical crew, both in Rangoon and here in Ann Arbor, who managed to set up this impossibly complicated conversation. You should know that this event is being carried by both the Voice of America and Radio Free Asia, and it will be available. And it will be available very, very soon on the university's website. I also would like to thank our students, Andrea, Tyler, Dominic, and Sarah, again. And we mustn't forget our American Sign Language translators, Christine Saunders and Krista Moran. Please join us in the lobby for some light refreshments. Thank you very much.